it's got the grooves to spin the bullet so that it will go straight. For the shotgun, it's really not necessary. You don't care if they go. I mean, you want it to go straight-ish, but it's going to spread out. So you don't really care if everything goes exactly straight. If it's going to spread, it doesn't have to go straight. So you don't have rifling on a shotgun for the shotgun pellets. As it turns out, when the bullet goes through past these grooves on the barrel, they will leave a mark on the bullet. Different makes of guns have different kinds of grooves that make the rifling. Sometimes they have 4 grooves that make, sometimes 6, different numbers. So when you find the used bullet, or rather the used cartridge, well, actually the used bullet. I mean, the cartridge doesn't go through the barrel. The bullet, when you find the bullet, let's say embedded in the victim, or maybe it hit a wall or something like that, or the floor, or the ground, you find the used bullet. It will show the marks of these grooves. Okay, what's usually done is we say, okay, I found the bullet. What kind of gun did this? So they take, we think it was, let's say, Colt 45. So they get a Colt 45, they put a bullet in it, and they fire it in a water tank. That's what, because they want to recover the bullet. So they fire it into the water tank and they recover it. Because, you don't want to fire it at a wall and get destroyed, or it might get destroyed. Fire it at a water tank, the water will slow down the bullet, so eventually you can pick it up off the bottom of the water tank. When that's done, you take a look at the bullet and you see how the grooves are. You see where there are 4 grooves, or 6 maybe, and they are in a certain distance away from each other. We compare that bullet that we fired. It's our standard, the one that we know, where we know the source is a Colt 45, let's say. It's called an exemplar also. But anyway, we know that standard bullet, that exemplar bullet, we know what it is. We compare it to the bullet that was actually fired at the crime scene, and we see, was it really the Colt 45? If the lands and the grooves are the same, then, or the grooves, you'll see, lands are the part that's not the groove. Anyway, if the lands and the grooves are the same, then, yes, this was fired by a Colt 45. And if we have a suspect who bought a Colt 45 the day before, again, we can put things together. In order to compare the two, we use a comparison microscope that we learned about. So we'll see a little bit more about this. Yeah, but by the way, this is a class characteristic that only tells what kind of gun it is. You can get individual characteristics, but first, let's see how this works.
When a handgun is fired, the bullet spins as it travels through the barrel. The soft outer shell is scored by a corkscrew line cut into the barrel, a process known as rifling. The line cut into the bullet is called a groove. The spaces between the grooves are called lands. These lands and grooves are different for each make of gun. Using a comparison microscope, forensic scientists compared the bullet from Joe Doyle's body to one fired from a Makarov pistol. Results were clear. Joe had been killed with the same model 9mm pistol that he had once owned but was now missing.
Okay, that was rather interesting and informative. The idea was that you can actually use the lands and the grooves to line them up. Okay, so there's yet another bit of evidence you can get from the bullet. These are from what they call striations. These are not the lands and the grooves. These are other scratch marks, smaller scratch marks that are, believe it or not, unique from gun to gun. A specific gun this has to do with maybe dirt particles that might have gotten in there. A little bit of tiny scratch got into the barrel of the gun. So as the bullet comes out of the barrel, it'll get nicked and scratched, tiny little scratches by these slight imperfections in the gun barrel. Every gun has different pieces of dust that got in there and different kind of nicks and scratches. So this is actually an individual characteristic where you can compare and relate the bullet to the exact gun. We mentioned the Colt 45. You might have the lands and the grooves can tell you it's a Colt 45, but if the striations of the bullet match the suspect's gun, then we know that that the suspect actually did fire that bullet. The idea is, again, what we do is we recover the bullet if we can that was fired at the crime scene. We fire a bullet into a water tank. We recover that bullet from the same gun. Now, as we suspect, we have the firearm that fired the bullet. We get that firearm. We put in another bullet. We fire that into the water tank. We take that exemplar bullet. We take that known bullet, which we know came from the suspect firearm, and we compare it. We compare not just the lands and the grooves, which we know are going to be, well, we're pretty sure are going to be correct, or we know that even without firing. We can fire. Anyway, we compare the striations, the small scratches of the bullet that from the suspect firearm, and the bullet from the crime scene. If the striations line up, and there are many of them, if they all line up, again, in theory, they're all going to line up, but they usually don't all line up. Anyway, if a lot of them line up between two bullets, then we know that the bullet at the crime scene was fired from that specific individual gun. So, and we use a comparison microscope to do this. Now, here's like an image from a comparison microscope. Here, these were actually bullets. This was, I think, the one found at the crime scene, and this was the exemplar bullet. So, the comparison microscope had one on one side and the other on the other, and see, this is the groove, the groove. Okay, that every one of the same kind of guns will do that, but these tiny little scratches here. Maybe that one is also a groove, but like these over here, you can see how they actually line up pretty well. These are the striations. These little ones are the striations. If they line up, and these are caused by the little imperfections in the gun barrel. If they line up, then we know that the suspect, the crime scene bullet, was fired by the same exact gun as the one that was tested. So again, you can see now, these line up. This one sort of lines up. Here it lines up pretty well. Here it lines up pretty well. Here, well, I'm not so sure. This lines up sort of pretty well again. Also, here, I don't think it lines up. It's hard to say there's much of a line, but it doesn't seem to line up that well. Here also, you can't tell. So the question could be, how many of these striations have to line up in order for you to know it's from the same gun? Now, unfortunately, there's no specific number. I mean, here, you look at these. 1, 2, 3, even I could find 4 of them just by glancing at it, and maybe a fifth over here. Here's another one. So if even I can glance at it, okay, that's pretty clear. What if there's only 2 that line up? Is that enough? How about 3? Well, again, it takes an experienced analyst to come up with a good answer. There is no required minimum, but you can very often you can kind of tell these things really look like they line up very well, a lot of them. So this is considered good enough evidence, and I think it was in the actual court case, that this crime scene bullet was from the exact same gun that produced this. This is individual characteristic, not a class characteristic. The lands and the grooves lining up, that's class. The striations, that's an individual characteristic. So now, okay, very good for rifles and handguns that have rifling, but what about a shotgun? They don't have any rifling. You're not going to find striations. How do you find characteristics? Well,